Every year, $3.5 trillion are dedicated to solve global poverty. Let's do some quick division. That's $500 per every person on Earth. There's no question about it. Global poverty has been the head-scratcher of governments, policymakers, and international organizations alike. Nothing has gotten more resources, more aid, or more attention. And rightfully so. I mean, look at this. Poverty sucks. But poverty sucks for mainly one big reason. Because poverty is the catalyst for so many other problems that cause human suffering. Because you increase incomes, you solve global poverty, suddenly life expectancy increases. People have access to education. People have access to healthcare, a simple vaccination for malaria, or an antibiotic to cure a simple cold. Higher incomes increases access to education and basic services. It also reduces societal discrimination and exclusion. And perhaps most importantly, eliminating global poverty means less conflict, war, and genocide, which has plagued the developing world for far too long. So, we get it, right? Poverty sucks. It's been the problem of the past, and unfortunately, the problem of the present. But let's pause and let's look ahead towards the future. Unfortunately, the snowstorm we had last month in Madrid was no pure coincidence. It's the very real and the very vivid effects of climate change. In fact, experts predict that global temperatures will rise by 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050. What does this mean? Let's quantify it. This is no simple statistic. It affects us in every aspect, rich and poor, from our transportation infrastructure to our food sources, to the clothes we wear, and yes, to the air we breathe. CO2 emissions and greenhouse gases kill us. In fact, it was responsible for 1 in 9 premature deaths last year. That's 6.5 million people, or 1 Madrid dead every single year. But as we begin to think rationally, let's put things into perspective. We start to notice a very big problem. What happens when we get richer? What do you and I do with higher incomes? We spend more, we consume more, we have more stuff, we travel more. Inevitably, having more income pollutes, and the developing world is no different. They need to pollute to survive. So, what do we pick? Are both of these problems inversely proportional? What would you do? Do you use the tools at our disposal to lift 3 billion people from poverty, whilst supposedly in the not-so-distant future condemning us all, destroying the planet we live on? Or do you willingly condemn 3 billion people to perpetual poverty, whilst 3 billion people to perpetual poverty, while saving our environment for the rest of us, for the rich of us to live? Think about it. We can't make a decision. In fact, it's impossible. It's unethical. It's wrong. At this point, you're probably thinking, you've been speaking for 4 minutes, and I'm pretty scared, but you really haven't said much. And you'd be right. So here's the thing. What if there didn't have to be a compromise? What if, with tools at our disposal, we could feasibly solve both of these issues, and within our lifetime? One magic number makes it all possible. Researchers from Bonn, Germany, determines that once average household incomes reach $15,000 per year, per capita emissions begin to decrease, or at worst, level off. Therefore, it is imperative we get to this number. Therefore, what we must do is pursue poverty-reducing policies that don't wreck our environment in the meantime. But this creates the same problem, doesn't it? We have to pick. It's easier said than done. So, how do we get there? The answer has been lying right under our noses. In my opinion, the unique combination of urbanization and globalization will get us out of this. And these are not new concepts. In fact, they've been subconsciously implemented for the past 25 years. But we must rethink the way we approach both of these concepts, adapt them to our new global challenges, because urbanization will keep our environmental footprint in check whilst allowing the developing world to prosper, and globalization, the tools, and the world market to make it possible. In fact, a recent study by the International Monetary Fund determined that the countries to benefit the most from globalization are precisely low to mid-income countries, those which suffer the most from poverty. And this has worked. Look at this. This is quite possibly my favorite graph. As Hans Rosling will tell us, we should be optimists. In the past 20 years, global poverty has halved. Halved. This is an incredible achievement, and we don't see it anywhere. The head scratcher, or the past 25 years, 75 years, is within our grasp. We can and we will eliminate global poverty within our lifetime. But if globalization is so good and helps us all, and all these beautiful graphs, then why is it that when I go to Brazil, to Ethiopia, or to India, the countries that will benefit the most, I come and I see this? This is misery. Trust me, I've seen these conditions firsthand. I wouldn't wish anyone to live here. Anyone with half a consideration for other human beings should be disgusted by these types of conditions. But let me tell you this. Slums, some slums, are a good thing. Before you cancel me, let me tell you why. Slums and the sweatshops where your sneakers and your t-shirts and your textile clothing are made, are a good thing. Because urban growth and development is the very best way to kill rural poverty, the worst and perhaps most dangerous form of poverty. Because extreme poverty is relatively rare in cities. People have, although limited and not where we want them to be, access to education and healthcare. And it's much better than the commonplace rural poverty, because cities do not create poor people. They attract poor people. Cities and sweatshops are not the causes, but the symptoms of global poverty. And it will be cities, not farms, but cities which save the developing world. Your Mumbai's, your Mexico cities, and your Sao Paulo's. But you might be surprised, because we're missing one part of our magic equation. We've urbanized, but we've yet to globalize, because cities without jobs and the opportunities, without the opportunities to move up the socioeconomic ladder, to learn skills, they suck. They lead, and they are the breeding ground for crime and disease, or even worse. This is Smoky Mountain in Manila. This 50-meter tall landfill was once the largest in the world. People come here and get trash to sell for a misery living. The toxic fumes created by this trash killed them. In fact, it was such an embarrassment for the Philippine government, they had to shut it down because it was such a symbol of poverty. This is why globalization is such an important part of this equation, because compared to this doesn't look so bad. This is Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, the sweatshop where your sneakers and your textile clothes are made. And definitely not where we want it to be, but this is an improvement. It's better than the immediate alternatives, or gaining an income from selling things from Smoky Mountain. And this is not permanent. People use this rung, as a ladder to something better, to more opportunities. People learn skills here, and this income is taxed. Governments can later spend that for public goods and services to give back for the people. This is a virtuous cycle of prosperity, because yes, this becomes this. Yes, South Korea was once a sweatshop, a huge slum. In the 1950s, your sneakers used to be made in South Korea. It went from a Smoky Mountain to a producer of manufactured goods to the high-tech service powerhouse we know today. The best engineers, doctors, innovators, developers flock in and out in South Korea. This is what happens when you globalize and urbanize. These are two stories. A country that remained rural and closed off, compared to a country that urbanized and globalized, opened its gates to the world market. South Koreans are 3 times as rich as their parents, 10 times as rich as their grandparents. This is the power of slums, of cities, of opportunities, of globalization and opening up to world markets. Still don't believe me? The South Koreans are richer than we are today. Yes, they are a first world country. And the great thing about the South Korean formula is it has no prescription. It can be prescribed to anybody. There are no prerequisites for this type of development. We just need to globalize and urbanize. And this is how it will save the world. At this point, you might be thinking, but what about our second problem? Isn't globalization bad for our environment? And yes, you'd be right. But not as much as you might think. Because globalization, it's all about efficiency. People will produce where it is more efficient to do so. And this is naturally where it is more environmentally efficient to do so. And not only that, free trade increases people's awareness of environmental issues in the developing world. And environmental standards are quickly rising in Brazil, in Mexico, and in China. But what about all that moving around? If for a simple CD player, the plastic is made in the Philippines, the case in China, the disc in Japan, and later consumed in the USA, doesn't this all pollute? Well, here's this for a fact. A CD player on a container ship from Osaka to LA pollutes less per capita than that same CD player on a truck from LA to a shop in LA. Once we reach economies of scale, the environmental efficiency is gained in the production, not in the delivery of goods. And let's also think about it. At least today, the largest environmental problems are caused by poverty, not wealth. 8 out of 10 people in sub-Saharan Africa still cook their food and heat their homes using wood-burning stoves. This kills their respiratory system. And not only that, higher incomes increase access to clean water because contaminated water is one of the largest killers, one of the largest preventable killers. So these problems are mitigated by having more money. But still, many think, and you would be right, as your Chinas, your Indias, and your Latin Americas grow rich, they will pollute more. And yes, until we reach that $15,000 turning point, these emissions will increase. Many might say that this is unsustainable, and they would be right. But their answer to this is that the Africans, the Indians, and the Chinese must stay poor, that they cannot live like us. But the answer is not that they cannot live like us, but that we cannot live the lifestyle we currently do. Because Africa only accounts for 3% of the world's energy usage, while accounting for 12.5% of the world's population. The United States, 19% of the world's energy, 4% of the world's population. Because we, a nation of SUV drivers, cannot tell people on bikes they cannot buy a scooter because it pollutes too much. What kind of logic is that? Subjecting 3 billion people to poverty is no solution to climate change. Let's make that very clear. But when we talk about changes in lifestyle, people get scared, and rightfully so. After all, our parents and so many generations before them have worked so hard to achieve the living standards we currently have in Europe, in Australia, and in the USA. That's why we must not attempt to be environmentalists, but smart and urban environmentalists, because urbanizing, city living, is the very best way to reduce our per capita CO2 emissions without significantly compromising our quality of life. This is a fact because a person who lives in Manhattan or Hong Kong pollutes less per capita than a person living in a small, rudimentary town. This is, at the end, our solution. Because when the developing world grows rich, when the Chinese, Indians, and Latin Americans grow rich, we must set an example, lead by the power of our examples, so that their cities look more like Singapore and less like Houston. Cities with similar living standards, but people in Houston pollute twice as much. Smart, urban cities are the future. This is how we solve our climate crisis. Cities with specified congestion charging, efficient public transportation system, and homes which are more environmentally efficient. Cities that embrace the power of renewables, and yes, of nuclear, because we cannot live without it. And cities are not just good for the environment. They also make us richer. As we saw with South Korea, cities can also make us in the developed world richer because ideas are exchanged in cities. These spontaneous interactions are what bring about progress, development, and innovation. So, urbanizing is how we keep us in check. In the meantime, before we get to $15,000, this is what we must do. While globalization works its magic, while the developing world gets richer, they also urbanize and take advantage of those opportunities. But we urbanize in order to allow them to grow rich. This is how we solve poverty and climate change. This is how globalization can save the world, because both of these issues require a change in mindset. That is how we solve them. Thank you.